All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Brian. Brian, welcome. Awesome to have you here today. And
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. And I'll tell you, I gotta. This is really interesting. So you and I met through our mutual friend Jeff. Now I met Jeff because this other friend of mine, Andrew, hosts this thing where he helps people like me who run podcasts find really great guests and stuff. And that's how I met Jeff. And I interviewed Jeff for the podcast. And after interviewing Jeff, I had asked him, like, hey, who do you know? Now that you've had this experience, who do you know who would make a really great entrepreneur to interview for this podcast? And Brian, he connected you and I. And you and I actually hopped here on Zoom last week, and we never did the podcast.
Yep.
We just got to talking between us, and I'm just like, man, this conversation is really good. Can we do the podcast interview later? And so we spent an hour just getting to know each other. But you know what? What a powerful testament to the power of relationships, because in that conversation I found out that you and Jeff have been friends since you were kids, and all of this. And then of course you and I, the way we connected so quickly, because Jeff was the one that introduced us. And what a testament to the power of relationships, because I have long believed that as entrepreneurs, relationships are the most valuable asset we possess. And of course, hosting this podcast for the last year and a half has just solidified that belief, because I've just seen it over and over. And I'm really excited to hear your story, hear your experience around this. And I'd like to just kind of start, Brian, by turning it over to you to share a little bit of your background, what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work you do, and just kind of say a little bit of context for the listeners, and let them know who Brian is and what's Brian all about.
Sure. Well, as we talked about last week, I've always had a knack or a want for work, and been doing odd jobs as a kid growing up, and basically entrepreneurship has kind of been my thing. I started off with a shredding business.
Mm-hmm.
I ran that for a number of years, sold that to a bigger company, and ran their shredding division and helped expand it nationwide around the country for them. And then did another sale of that business and continued to run the New York, New Jersey operation for them for a number of additional years. Got into another side of their business on the IT infrastructure management services work, and then moved off into a new venture with through another relationship from somebody at the existing company. So we'll get back into that later.
Okay.
Went to work for them for a number of years, and then was brought back into the shredding world when the rest of the New York, New Jersey business was sold off to a private equity business. Ran that for them for a few more years, went through another sale, and then it wasn't until the final deal where I was working for the new owner for about a year, and was looking for another exit, basically for, me to go down my next venture, my next career. I'd always wanted that new opportunity to get into another business, and it wasn't until this final deal where I had I was in an employment contract for a year with him, knowing that at the end would be my final venture down the shredding world. I actually met somebody through a friend of mine. He was a career coach, and we were talking about, other avenues that I could, go down in my career. And at the end of the conversation, he said, Brian, you've got a great background, operations, you do sales. He's like, I know 15 different people that would love to talk to you. He's like, but you know what? It honestly sounds like you should be a business owner again. I said, well, yeah, that's true. I've looked at different businesses over the years, and always wanted to get back into, doing my own thing and controlling my own destiny. And he said, "Yeah, I'm going to introduce you to somebody. She's a franchise consultant." And I said to him, I said, "Well, I've talked to one or two of those in the past." I said, "It never really worked out for me." He's like, "No, no, 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 no. She's different. She's good." So I ended up talking to her and went through the 100 questions to fill out about, personality and this and that. And she paired me up with three different options. All were great fits for me. So she was fantastic in that regard.
Wow.
And Monster Tree Service was actually the business that I thought was the best fit for me. And I thought that they had a great business model. So that's where I'm at today. I'm currently running the Northern New Jersey franchise for Monster Tree Service. So, I'm managing two crews. I've got a lot of capital expense and equipment out there, and growing the business. Did over 1 million in revenue last year, and continuing to climb. So we're very very fortunate and happy to be doing what I'm doing, and back to the conversations with people like yourself. I always love talking to new people, meeting new people. And I've actually been doing a little bit of consulting on the side for myself, helping out different people, just friends and family, really, with some business ventures and business ideas. But that's pretty much where I'm at right now.
Very good. Very good. That's the one thing that really stood out to me when we were talking last week is, you have had quite the history as an entrepreneur and stuff. You've done a lot of different things. You've got experience in exiting companies and just a really great background in history and stuff. And it's so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, and I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners. So, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And Brian, I am just really excited to hear your story and your experience around this. And I'll just turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so when you ask that question, there's definitely, two people that come to mind for me, that really had a drastic impact on the direction of my life and my career. Um, I wouldn't necessarily call this an introduction per se, but
Okay.
I would say that the Brian pre-college or college years and earlier versus the Brian post-college entering into the working world.
Mhm.
Definitely, I would consider two different people. One
Okay.
much more mature than the other. Um, so I would say the reintroduction to my father. He actually was the one that brought home a Cranes article about the shredding industry,
Okay.
and it talked about the opportunity for the market to basically open up, all new regulations coming down the pipeline, and low barrier to entry to get into the business. At the time, I was living at home, so I didn't have very much overhead at all.
Mhm.
So that's actually the person that had a major impact on me, because again, he knew me, and I knew that I wanted to get into a business, but I never knew what to do. I looked at some options here and there, but that was definitely a defining moment for me that established my future and my career path.
Yeah.
Because if I hadn't met him, um, then I never would have gone down that road. And obviously, using him as a mentor to help, you know, I never knew what a P&L was before that time. I mean, I knew about it because I learned about it in college, but I mean, there was definitely a number of different things that I had learned from him directly, to help get the business established.
Mhm.
Um, and then I would say that from there, the next introduction to somebody was actually through, the father of a childhood friend of mine. He actually met this gentleman at a cancer fundraiser. He had just sold an office supply business, and he just bought a new company. It was an industry that he was looking to add on as another segment to his office supply business.
Okay.
And he said, he's explaining that, oh, we're in plastic crates. We, rent these plastic crates to companies that are moving. We do shredding. So when the company moves, we take their stuff and shred it for them instead of them paying to move old files. Um, and my friend's father said, "Oh, shredding. Yeah, I know, a young guy, good guy. He has his own shredding business." And the gentleman said, "Oh, would love to meet him. Would love to talk to him." Um, so my family friend set up the meeting. I met this gentleman for lunch and met him at a diner. I was in my dressed up in a suit and tie, which I wore maybe once or twice a year for holidays and whatnot. Because other than that, I was driving a truck and working in the office, doing invoicing and calls and whatnot. So I was always wearing just like a polo shirt
Yep.
when I was out in the truck. And he said to me, he said, so we talked our talk and everything. I said, it's very admirable of you. You just told me this story. You sold this office supply business for a bunch of money, and now you're in this other business, and you want to do shredding. I said, I can definitely do shredding for you. I love the fact that you're hungry and want to, continue to grow a new business. He said, yeah, and I think it's admirable for you too. He said, what are you doing right now for sales? What's your business doing? I said, well, right now I'm not making any money. I said, but because I'm driving the truck and doing the shredding. I said, but I thought meeting with you would be an opportunity that was worthwhile to have, for a potential future. And sure enough, we made a deal together, and he bought my shredding business, and I went on and worked for him as an employee for probably about 10 years, and made a pretty nice career out of it. And as I mentioned before, we grew the business. By the time we exited everything outside New York, New Jersey, we were doing a run rate of about 13 to 14 million a year in revenue. We were one of the largest shredding businesses, if not the largest privately owned shredding business at the time, before we sold to Cintas in 2010. Um, so that was substantial growth in a matter of 3.5, 4 years.
Yeah.
And and again, knowing that gentleman introduced me to many more people. So one of my dear friends was our former CIO, and I always run things by him from a technology standpoint, and we're always trying to figure out stuff to do together. Um, and I was introduced to the former CEO's friend who hired me to go work for them in a totally separate industry. So if you want to talk about how one introduction can lead to another introduction that has further change or impact down the road, meeting new people certainly opens up new doors, and that's definitely had an effect on me in my life and my career. So
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I mean, what, like I was telling you, every time I do an interview for this podcast and hear somebody else's story, it's like further confirmation of just how valuable relationships are to entrepreneurs. And like you have just
sure.
once again demonstrated that, Brian. and
Yeah.
and so now I'm curious. You've talked about your father who had brought that article home and kind of got you going down this path of running the shredding company and stuff. And then you met this gentleman who had the office supply business that you just had that conversation with. And through that, he saw in you and he saw in what you were doing that decided to invest in. And I I'm just if you look at these two relationships, I want to kind of, because I love digging into this and just getting a little bit more detail because it really does demonstrate the power of these relationships. But if you look at just those two relationships and what has transpired over the years, and you can pick one or the other, but like I'm just, I would love to hear a story or an example of, where you guys were able to make a big impact together that, hands down would have never happened without the relationship that you had with them. And so what's something that just immediately comes to mind for you in that regard, Brian?
Um, I mean, the gentleman from the office supply company always told me, you know, it never hurts to ask. You know, he's a salesman, right? So that was his thing, and that's what he was really good at. It's funny because I was talking to a friend of mine earlier today about it. He said, "Yeah, CEOs are typically just figureheads because at the end of the day, they're really the salesman behind the business."
Mhm.
And it's true with him. And I think taking that advice from him, you know, not being afraid to ask, to make that ask, has helped me to close some deals, some sizable deals that I don't think I necessarily might have done if I hadn't taken that word of wisdom. Um, Specifically, we put our business on the map when I closed a deal for Xerox
Okay.
nationwide for shredding services. I'll never forget it. We were actually out in Long Island for a executive getaway, talking about sales and everything. And guys from all over the country are flying in. And because I was a local guy, I had, was driving some people back from Long Island to the airport
Okay.
on the way back from this sales getaway. And I got a call from this guy from JLL who basically was their outsourced, sourcing manager for Xerox. And I was in the car. I had, three or four other guys in my car at the time. I get this call. He tells me where he's from, and I'm like shushing the guys in the background, and basically went through a whole sales pitch on the ride to the airport, and that was basically laid the groundwork for me to close the deal for them because here was this gentleman that had a whole slew of 120 locations around the US and Canada to manage and to get their costs and spend under control because they were all using different vendors and everything, and I
Oh,
basically offered him a one-stop shop to manage all of that, whether it was through our own providers with our own trucks and our own equipment or through what I had called our preferred network of local mom and pops that were vetted by myself. Um, so yeah, I mean that basically was the launching pad for us to really penetrate around the country, both in locations where we had physical presence and areas where we didn't, where we established this network. And again, back to my CIO, he helped me set up basically software to help manage that whole process so that we could receive invoices from our partners and then process it all into a one consolidated invoice for the customer, which at the time he was not getting, and he wasn't getting any reporting or anything like that. So
okay.
it was a game changer for us, for sure.
Yeah. Wow. It was a game changer for them too. I mean, you solved a big problem for them, no doubt about it.
Oh
And
yeah,
just streamlined thing. And like you said, they didn't have the reporting and now they did. And you solved a huge problem for them, which that's always the deal. We solved
yeah,
the bigger problems we can solve, the more value we are to other people. And so yeah, what a
exactly.
great example. Yeah. So um first of all, I mean, Brian, thanks so much for taking the time to have this conversation and share what you did. The goal for this podcast has always been really simple from the start. It's twofold. I wanted to give entrepreneurs like yourself the opportunity to share your story and your experience around your most valuable relationships, but also for the listeners, who are also entrepreneurs, CEOs, founders, and just hearing what my guests share it inspires them to place an intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in their own life. And we have
Sure.
definitely delivered on that today. So thank you so much for your role in that, Brian. Really appreciate it. For anybody listening to this, going, man, I really like that Brian guy. I like what he shared. I like the way he shows up and stuff. How can they find out more? Is there resources, website, what have you? They can find out, connect with you at all.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You
Okay.
can certainly connect with me on there. Definitely email as well. But yeah, LinkedIn, I'm on there. I'm active. People reach out to me all the time for different things, and yeah, definitely open to helping people out any way I can.
Awesome. Well, I will make sure we include that info with the show notes and stuff. Any last thing you want to share, Brian, before we call it a wrap?
No, I think key to this podcast, I would say definitely it pays to know people, and it pays to meet new people. And certainly, as I was taught, it never hurts to ask. So,
That's right.
some people might be afraid to make that ask. Don't be afraid to make that ask because, as he says, the worst thing that they'll say is no.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well, Brian, thanks again for taking the time to have this conversation today. Really appreciate it. I'm excited to share this interview with a lot of other entrepreneurs and founders. So thanks again.
No problem. Thank you.